Hey guys, look, welcome to day three, and yes, we're all doing video from our various locations. We'd love to be doing this with you in person, or at least for Lance, me, Andrew, Krista. We'd all like to be in the same room doing this with you. But here we are, and I guess the advantage of the current situation is we literally can do this from anywhere. The disadvantage is we just can't get together and kind of look each other right in the eye and we miss seeing you guys. So all of you who are on this video, we miss seeing you in person, and hope to be back in person with all of you at some point next year, even if it's not a conference in smaller numbers, right? It'd be great to see you guys. So let me begin. And let me introduce my partner in crime, Lance Gibbs. Lance and I started BP3 back in 2007. And we have been kind of yin and yang, or Laurel and Hardy, depending on, your analogy, for many years since. And, we are so fortunate to have the support of the team that we have to do this for you guys, to bring this kind of content to you guys, to bring, this kind of content to your projects, to your engagements. And it's really meant everything to me, Lance. And one of the best parts about it for me has been partnering with Lance over the last 13, almost 14 years now.
I kind of believe him. I sort of believe him. Maybe I'm not completely sold, but keep going, Scott. Please.
Right. So far, so good. Right. Keep going. All right. Let me dive into our content for Process Automation Day. Please let me know right away if for some reason slides don't advance. That's happened to me once or twice. So look, I love that we start with coffee every morning in our sessions. Stuart does a fantastic job brewing coffee. He also does a fantastic job, talking about coffee and the process, and just makes you want to make a cup of coffee. And turning coffee into process is like one of my favorite mugs that we ever made. It pretty well describes what we do at BP3, right? We wake up, drink coffee, try to help you with your processes, and we bring that more focus, more foresight, more follow-up approach to every process. And now we're going to talk about, how that, just overall, how we think about process automation. And we've got a really nice schedule for you today. We'll start out talking about process automation. Is it dead? Does it matter in today's economy? There are new techniques for process discovery that are new to the industry, that may not be new to us, or if you're a serious practitioner in the process space, you may have already known about them all. But it takes a while, as the old saying goes, the future's already here, it's just unevenly distributed. It certainly takes a while for new techniques to sort of disseminate through the industry. And then I think it's important to understand when to apply traditional methods to process discovery and process improvement. There's the tendency to discard old methods or consider them bad just because they're older than what we consider new. And, in America especially, right, we always want the new thing, or the new thing. And so there's always a competition to be next and new. We'll talk about BPMN in that light, right? Is it still a thing? Does it matter, right? Why does it matter? And then we'll talk about automating, your choices about how you automate processes. And we're going to cap this off with an interview with Jeremy Warren of Keller Williams, about how to build processes for regular people at Keller Williams. And I think it's it'll be a fantastic opportunity to pick Jeremy's brain about how they approach this, how they think about it, and not just about how they think about the technology, but how they think about the people that they're serving and the business value they create. All right. Well, right here at Driven, you are seeing the 5 themes that we see with our clients that matter, right, to improving their business, to creating great results. It's artificial intelligence. We talked about it on Monday. Automation and robotics, we talked about yesterday on Tuesday, and a great set of sessions there. Today, we're talking about process automation. And tomorrow, we'll talk about application modernization. And finally, on Friday, we'll talk about design and enterprise user experience. And, if you ask me, these are all interwoven, right? We separated them into days to create themes, but you get the most value out of these techniques when you're able to connect them and tie them together. So we'll try to get into that, as we go through. All right, first of all, if we're going to talk about process automation, maybe we should define it. And I picked 2 different definitions. just to give a sense for the way people think about these things. And one is the technology-enabled automation of complex business processes. And I think that's the right kind of definition when you think about process and automation. A second one, which is a little more focused on business process automation, is a discipline involving any combination of modeling, automation, execution, control, measurement, and optimization of business activity flows. That's a mouthful. You certainly won't remember that one off the top of your head, but it does, in a very complete way, describe the kinds of things you need to consider to do process automation. And you can see a nice little beeping diagram off to the right. The first question is, Lance, is process dead, right? Have we killed it?
Yeah, not so much. We've been, and this is an analogy is done, right? From the point you wake up, you can call it a routine, you can call it a process. Some processes are a little more obviously disciplined than others. But we as just humans behave in a process in our everyday lives. It's just what we do. And no, it's not dead. And certainly when you look at it from a standpoint of business, process is there for a lot of reasons. Quite often, I think, processes for some may be viewed in the terms of a constraint. It's not, something that's hard and fast, and I can't really do anything. I have to kind of work within a confine. And the truth is, most processes are actually very dynamic. They're not, status quo, 100% of the standard. But no, it's certainly not dead by any stretch of the imagination. Would you like me to talk a little bit about Scott or that?
I lost your audio a little bit there, Lance. You can say that again?
Oh, sorry about that. Is that a little bit better?
Yep.
Testing 1, 2, 3. All right. So no, process isn't dead. I don't know where I cut off at, but yeah, I mean, this is
that last question.
Yeah. So process isn't dead. It is one of those things where, from the 90s, we had total quality management. Michael Hammer was certainly a leader in that, but the notion was tear down walls, build teams. And I remember that walking around the train organization back in the day when I was working there. That was kind of the notion. And funny how that has translated into now, some of the principles of Agile. And then certainly, in the 2000s, BPM has been declared dead by various analysts. Evolving or changing than anything else, frankly. Lean Six Sigma may have been viewed as kind of old school. It's for manufacturing, it doesn't work, but certainly that's not the case. In fact, the discipline of Lean Six Sigma is still growing. It hasn't flattened out, it hasn't stalled, it's evolved. It's not the same things that Motorola and Allied Signal did back in the 80s. Then we hear in 2010s, well, we got walled gardens. We don't really need to worry about process as much. RPA, kill a process, everything can be, straight through. And then now we're into this low or no code platforms. But again, these are tools. And the tools are no different than methods. So the answer to the question is process dead, not by a long shot. It is very much alive and well.
I mean, I think you make a couple of good points there. I mean, in the 90s, I mean, I remember from a technology point of view, right, when we talked about process back then, it was all about personal desktop, like workflow. Like, there was no notion of work being flowed from one person to another, one department to another. It was all personal organizational, productivity in terms of what technology was available. And I remember at the time working on a solution, believe it or not, using Lotus Notes, right, to do that orchestration between groups. And we had basically a database for each department. And the process was to move an order, from one department to the next, depending on what kind of approvals it needed. And, that was the notion, the best we could do at the time in terms of what technology was available to that customer. the world's totally different now, right? All that orchestration can be drawn as a diagram instead of written as code that moves things from one database or database table, to another. So to me, one of the reasons process isn't dead is because it keeps riding along this wave of technology change. And as the technology changes, we just find new ways to express those processes.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. And so what I think, I think at this point too, most companies, certainly I've talked to and worked with and interviewed, back even when I was writing a book about this stuff, I mean, they get processes very much alive.
When I was thinking about, Lance, all the times that we have seen, sort of companies that are struggling with bad processes, and it kind of reminded me of, Jeff, oh gosh, what was his last name? You might be a redneck if.
Jeff Foxworthy.
Foxworthy, there we go.
That's
yes,
it.
Jeff Foxworthy,
Yeah.
right? He had this great routine about you might be a redneck if, and of course he's a lot funnier than I am. But things that you'll hear in your organization, right? That Lance and I hear this all the time. Oh, we don't have a process for that. And I think I've heard Lance say more than once, I guarantee you have a process for that, right? Like we're talking about fulfillment, or we're talking about onboarding a customer, and we'll say, well, we don't really have a process for that. Lance will say, I guarantee you do. Maybe it's not good, but you have a process.
Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, why don't we take our first poll then, right here, and see, are people feeling constrained by your company's processes? So is this something that comes in the way? You have a process, it might not be a good one, to Scott's point.
Yeah. No, this is a good poll question. Another one, right? We're too busy putting out fires to have a process for that, right? Just the fact that everybody's busy putting out fires indicates you've got work to do. Right? Processes getting in the way of getting things done. This, to your poll question point, is when you start perceiving process as a constraint.
Yeah, and over in the chat, we've got the entire reason for process is to deliver predictability. A proven process results in a predictability. Lack of process results in unpredictability.
That's a fact. Yep.
Well, we'll go ahead and end this poll and share the results here.
Yeah, I think that's, right there, you can see that there are two ways to read this, right? And a naive read would say, process constrains me, right? I feel constrained by process. I think more nuanced read is that in our audience, we're feeling constrained by the processes we have, not process in general necessarily, although they might associate the two, but by the specific processes as they are currently implemented. And that is a sign that there's work to be done, right? Right.
Yeah, I agree. As an anecdote, I mean, that typically, and just being real about it, right? People who, I guess, the individual that created the process feels least constrained by it, right? All of these things happen that way. It's just someone does something by their mental model, and the fact of the matter is, it could potentially be done in a broader, more adaptive way.
Yeah, I think the old golden rule, right? Do unto others, as you would have them do unto you. It's always easier to think that you've done unto others quite well, and but maybe ask them how they feel about it.
Right.
Another common expression we get is well, we're more bottom up. And look, a lot of innovation and process innovation can happen bottom up. It's a great way to experiment with new ideas and try them out without rolling them out to $1 billion organization. Try them out in a $10 million or $100 million division. But at some point, you need to advance beyond pure bottom up approach. And then this one, when you hear something like this, like we're looking at a process, we're going through a discovery with you, and there's some fields, and you start filling out things that don't match the indicator. Like the label says, what product are you selling? But in the field, you write instead the business unit you're selling to or some other information. When you start overloading what fields are used for in your software, right, there's definitely something's wrong, right? And we need to be thinking about rethinking the process, rethinking the implementation of that process, right? These are, signs that things have really ossified. You're getting this sort of legacy system bias. And this one, Lance, I don't think you've ever heard this one before. We had to change our process to fit the software we bought.
Oh yeah, yeah, once or twice.
Right.
Back in the day of Oracle Financial's ERP deployment, I may have heard that, saw that, experienced that.
Right. And I think if you declare process bankruptcy, like our processes are horrible, so any process would be better than what we have, then you might benefit from picking one of these, systems and adopting the processes that they impose upon you. And without naming names, you know who they are, right? The big ERP system successors are really, who you're looking at. But it doesn't have to be that way. And if you haven't declared process bankruptcy, like you actually think you can improve and make good on your processes, then you really benefit from not letting the software dictate the process to you.
Yeah, and a lot of things, we talk about when we had to change our process to fit the new software, just real quick. I mean, people do this all the time, and, we call this kind of the hidden processes or hidden work. People are already adapting to work around constraints. People are a lot like water that way. They're going to flow to, the sharpest elevation, the lowest point on the floor to work around things that get in their way. So this is why we start seeing process debt and a disconnect from what the tools are supposed to be a help, but instead they become a complete challenge and obstacle to getting stuff done.
Right.
So one question that we've got in the Q&A right now is, how important is model-driven development in the automation space?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah. You want to grab that, Lance?
Yeah, I think it is critical. And one of the reasons is when you look at process diagrams, for the most part, now this isn't everybody certainly, but for the most part, you have to appreciate this is just communication art, right? But that communication art is important. It can you could use lean notation if people are familiar with it, or typical swim lane fashions, or whatever, boxes and line. It doesn't really matter. It's a way to communicate what people believe is happening and occurring. And when you have a model-driven kind of development paradigm, that is really the connection between what is typically offline, disconnected, and bringing it into something that you can viscerally experience what this reality is. And I think for that very reason alone, you take the communication art to a more of a physical, visceral experience. Model-driven development is pretty key for that. It's hard for me to imagine not having that in today's world.
Yeah, I mean, I think a common expression that we throw about within BP3 is that, look, no model is perfect or completely accurate, but models can be incredibly useful, right? And I think the quote from someone named Box is that all models are wrong, but some are useful. And I would soften that a little bit to say, well, okay, if you're looking for completely representing reality, all models are wrong. But when you're looking at solving a problem, at communicating about either the problem or the solution, those models and model-driven development is super important to get consensus on the definition of the problem or consensus on the solution and how it works. Like those communication vehicles are incredibly important. And that's one of the great values of model-driven development is it allows you to convert something that's abstract into something concrete that our more primitive brains can really process and reason about. I think, another great example before we move on of things that you'll hear is when you can't get status, right? Like what's happening. My customer wants to know what's happening. My boss wants to know what's happening, and I can't tell them, right? I have to go run reports or I have to do extra work to find out. Those are signs that your processes need work, right? You might have a bad process. And, I'd say the other thing that Lance and I believe really strongly is that your company is effectively the sum of your processes. I mean, it's more things. It's also the sum of your people, your assets, your capital, your infrastructure, right? There's other things that matter. But in terms of how your customers experience you, it's the sum of your processes, right? The experiences you create. And you don't want to be drowning like the stop sign there. You want to get your processes right so that you're supporting your customers. And, I think another element of this customer experience to think about is maybe customer experience versus customer journey. If you think about experiences, I like the way Rob Koplitz from Forrester puts this, that experience is how you feel and journey is the process, right? Customer journey is the process you took through to have that experience. And the experience at the end of the day, how you judge it is how you feel. So if I'm at a restaurant and they mess up my order, but they get me the tres leches for free at the end of the meal, I'm gonna feel pretty good about that. I will forgive a lot for a good tres leches. If it's a bad tres leches, then forget it. But a good tres leches, I'll forgive a lot. And by the way, Chuy's in Austin has an amazing tres leches, and you should just skip the main meal, order the tres leches, and then see if you're still hungry. But back to the experience. The journey, though, if you're going to produce a great customer experience at scale, you have to have a good process that, on the whole, back to that predictability comment, predictably produces a good experience, right? And that's the challenge. You can't just rely on individual exceptionalism to produce great customer experience. You have to also have process to do it at scale.
Yeah, I think in the chat, Brad said, he'd like to also say that, processes affect the employee experience too. That is absolutely key in this, because, even at the end of the day, the path to this customer experience excellent runs through employee experience. These things are not disconnected. They never are. And those processes, even though they feel very much, well, it's in my group or my department, doesn't really impact the customer, I promise you it does. I promise you. There is going to be some absolute correlation and even potentially causation to whether a process is viewed as a great thing, a good experience, or delivers on that, or whether it's not. And that is absolutely, right. That's key. So that's a great point to bring.
So this is a great time.
No, I think
to throw in our next poll question. So this poll question got cut off a little bit, but it's: do you consider your work part of a larger process, or is it more independent work? I think the word process and the question mark were at the end of that. I'm not sure where they ended up.
Right. Now this is an interesting one, right? Because I think Lance and I, we talked about this internally at BP3, that there may be only two processes that really matter. If you back way out, right? It's the customer's journey and the employee's journey. And if you can take both of those and those people on a great journey, then you're going to produce great results, right? The results will take care of themselves for the most part. And if you take them on a journey that is highly varied and has a lot of twists and turns and frustrations, then either part of that equation can fall apart. Employees can be super happy and taken care of, but if the clients aren't happy, eventually that bleeds over, right? Like it starts to affect how employees feel about what they're doing, and vice versa. If employees aren't happy, no matter how good the experience is for a customer, at some point that frustration will spill over. And you can see, from our poll results, most of the people responding are really seeing their work as part of a larger whole. And I think that is an indication that
that's right.
That you're going to be thinking about process. The process has value to the way you're thinking about your work or your organization's work. If you feel like you're more independent, you may feel more like process is a barrier or a constraint to you, because you feel like, if I didn't have to worry about that stuff, I didn't have to fill out expense reports, I could just crank and get all my work done. And there's some validity to that.
Yeah, and even I think nowadays we have to think about the customer, we think about the employee, but man, there's also we have digital ecosystems now where there's partners, and partners play such a key role in the value chain of whatever company is delivering product, good, or service. It is important to factor in them as well, right? And because you have it, doesn't make our lives easier. No, absolutely doesn't. But at the end of the day, it is going to be a necessity more and more to be able to better integrate partners into the employee and customer ecosystem.
No, you're right. Thinking about key partners is one way to differentiate too from your other competitors in the industry. If you can make it easier for partners to work with you, it will bring you more business and more referrals. So let's talk a little bit. I want to use an analogy here to help think about process, right? Those lines on the road there, those are constraints. When I'm driving on this road and there are no cars, the fact that those lines tell me not to cross over into oncoming traffic of which there is none, that is a constraint on me. It's constraining my behavior. It's because I might want to weave back and forth. I might want to use the other side. I might want to pass someone who's going slowly. But that constraint enables a higher level of throughput on those roads, knowing that you don't have to worry about weaving through oncoming traffic, that you only have to worry about traffic traveling in the same direction you are. is a huge win. Knowing that traffic will align into lanes rather than just having a free-for-all, which if you've driven across certain bridges in the Northeast, you know what I'm talking about when it devolves into free-for-all. Like, how many lanes are on this bridge? I don't know. It's either 6 or 8, depending on how wide your car is. And, these are important, right? It produces more throughput, despite being a process that is a constraint when there's only one of you or two of you, right? At a higher volume, it's enabling. And then, what we're trying to do is prevent this, right? We're trying to prevent the accidents. And if you think about what do you do with process, right? Having a good process may slow down a single instance of that process running versus not having it. I just edit the data and I ignore all process. But at a larger volume, right? Having a process will make sure you run it correctly, make sure you can run more of it and be confident, and you won't have these accidents, right? You won't have to call in the EMS to rescue your flamed out car on the side of the road. So I think it's always, there are a lot of things in our life that we look at as constraints naturally, but a lot of those constraints actually enable us to function at a high volume and at a high capacity. All right. We used to, Lance and I used to work at Lombardi Software, and Phil Gilbert was one of the great executives and characters at Lombardi. And when he was at IBM afterward, he had a quote at a talk that really stuck with me. So he said, the only way a company sustains anything is through process, right? And now he was no longer running, he was running the design group at that point at IBM, or the design studio, as they call it, not running BPM or process or digital process automation. So he had moved on, but he still firmly believes in the value of process to an organization. So if he wanted to change the way IBM worked, he had to change change their design process. You have to change the process. You can't just throw design at it, right? So he really understood that and advocated for it. And I would say, I think Lance would agree, that the best way the company sustains process is through software, right? So have a process to make that change, but to sustain it, you need software to keep it going, right? Don't just rely on people to remember or some training or some enablement, right? Actually have software to help them.
Yeah, if I could point out something, and back in the, with Six Sigma, back before we really had any kind of notion of model-driven, process-orchestrated type of tooling. In the process of Six Sigma, the method, you have DMAIC, D-M-A-I-C, which is define, measure, analyze, improve, control. And everything goes swimmingly until the control part, which is really where the project is then, I wouldn't call it handed off, but let's say the process owner takes on the role that it used to be. This was done through spreadsheets. They would just kind of check boxes, in terms of their compliance and governance. So control usually is where the wheels came off, and that team that helped improve the process is back 3 or 4 months later. So to Scott's point around this, the best way a company sustains process is through software. Yeah, in terms of nailing it up and having something there. Yeah, that's exactly right. That is the world we live in right now.
Yeah, so I'm going to jump in with a couple Q&As real quick. So first, this was just a comment that process should be very repeatable. Develop, define, improve the process with continuous improvement, and repeat the process billions of times. This also builds process efficiency, and I think we all can agree with that. And then we had a question of, when you're part of any process development team, how important is it to understand the whole system and instead of just getting your specific development point right? Kind of leading from that previous poll question. And I think Lance answered it really well over here, that it says it's important. The question is, what level and what context and to what end do you need to know? Because there is no such thing as disconnected. Everything is linked to that point. And then when we're talking about scaling, we have a interesting Q&A. How valuable do you think citizen developers will become when we drive low-code process automation? How manageable is citizen development from the governance perspective?
Right. Well, I think we want to come back to that.
That's a great one. Yeah.
It is a great question. But I think it'll be more relevant, as we get to that, to low code, no code in a few minutes. I think back to that first one about, you want the repeatability and the scale. Look, in large part, we focus on processes that have that kind of scale, that execute thousands of times, hundreds of thousands, millions, billions of times. But I will say there are processes that execute less often, and they're valuable processes. Think things like company planning, strategic planning, planning your hiring and headcount for the next year, your capital planning. What are you going to spend on factories and software? Like, those are really valuable processes that are not high volume, right? But they have huge impact on your business. And if you need help with those kinds of processes, that is the kind of thing that, that Lance and I get directly involved in to help clients think through, or BRAC in Europe, right? Those are, David Brakenecki, we call him BRAC. Those are things our executive team gets engaged in, because that's the kind of help you need in those situations. But the volume of our work is more about the processes that have lots of volume, because those are the ones that also need to be automated. So when you think about those big, important processes that are also infrequent, they don't need a lot of automation, but they do need plenty of care and feeding at times. Now, the second question you asked, or second comment you asked there, Krista, I lost track of the topic on that one.
So when you're part of a process development team, how important is it to consider the whole system instead of specifically what process you're developing? Right.
So let me give you kind of two, I think, really important thoughts. One is, that is process thinking, right? Is thinking about what happens before me, what happens after, what happens to things that are adjacent to what I'm like. I'm looking at this team, but there are other teams that do similar work. What happens to them? That is process context thinking. And if you are looking at implementing things like RPA or AI to assist with a decision or a task automation, it is critical to think about the process context, what happens around that bit. Otherwise, you end up doing something we call squeezing the balloon, right? I made this one thing faster, but all I did was push work to the people before me or the people after me. And that doesn't actually make the whole thing flow faster. Whereas if I could look at the whole thing, I might be able to tick the boxes for those other steps in the process and make the whole thing faster and get better throughput. So I think that linking of what happens before and after in the development process is critical. That's probably no surprise given the business we're in and the background we have. I'd say the other reason I think process matters right now that makes it more immediate, perhaps, is as Forrester has said, that COVID is exposing and accelerating automation, right? That didn't create the need for a more comprehensive approach to process automation, but it revealed it, right? And Rob Koplowitz at Forrester has several times, really beat the drum that the reason lots of digital transformation effort have failed or run into trouble is because they haven't focused enough on process. That they've tried to create automation without a sense of how it all fits together and what the customer journey will be and what the employee journey will be, right? And COVID has re-shown the light, it's really put that light on what are those processes and how do they work and how do we automate them efficiently and effectively. Forrester also took time out to write a new Forrester wave, right? The Digital Process Automation Service Providers wave for Q3 2020. It's a bit of a mouthful to say all at once. And, we're really, first of all, pleased that they put attention on this space and on what we do as an industry, but also what we do as BP3. And in particular, we have to thank our customers. One of them obviously gave, a fantastic quote to the article that Forrester wrote, or to the research that they wrote, saying that we're honest. Our team is honest, talented, hardworking, truly have their clients' best interests at heart. Right. And I agree, our greatest strength is our team, our people, but it's also our clients and their people. Right. And, you guys have really supported our team being successful in all of these engagements. But I think the importance of this work in the time we're in has just been emphasized by the fact that we're all remote. We can't meet in the kitchen and talk about things. We can't meet over lunch and talk about how we want to change the process. We have to do it over a Zoom call or over a phone call. So the other bit, and Dave Brakenecki shared this with you yesterday, if you were on that call, we shared a little bit about the survey results. Since COVID, what is the impact on your spending, right? And of course, you see an increase in spending on things that are maybe unrelated, like analytics and cybersecurity. But notice that more than half of the respondents are spending more money on process automation, including RPA, but on process automation in general. And almost half are spending more money on artificial intelligence. And then when you add the increase and stay the same, right, you're in the category of, north of 90% for process automation, and for artificial intelligence as well, you're right at, 89%, combined. So it really shows the emphasis on process and how important this is to what we all do, right, to run our businesses. So if process is so important, right, hopefully Lance and I have conveyed how important we think it is. Maybe we should talk a little bit about how we define a process, right? How do we go through that process of discovering and defining? And, I think one of the cool things about what we do is new technology enters the stage, and process mining has been around for a while. Quite a few years ago, I got my first exposure to it in a demo, and, it looks like magic, right? You hook it up to a log file, and you can, in an automated way, discover the process. That is kind of an amazing, experience the first time you see it. They can even do some animation of like, here's how the process ran, and show you kind of historically how it works. So, we can gain insights into how a process is actually executed by looking at the data in the systems that are used. And that is an advantage over the perception of how it's executed, in that it's reality. It's just what's happening. However, there are some issues. And, one of them is that I may not understand the context of what's happening, right? So I have the data, but do I understand it? And, so these insights that we get may confirm our perceptions of the process, or they may cause us to rethink our perceptions of the process or restudy them. It can reduce the need for interviews, or it certainly can introduce or reduce the need for doing time series, right? Where you're actually checking how long does it take them to do X, Y, or Z activities. And it can help identify some of the causes of poor performance, like bottlenecks in the process. So that's something that can be quite helpful. And there are additional uses for process mining that are related. So process discovery is kind of the first good use case for process mining. Performance mining is another, right, where you really look at the bottlenecks or how processes change or possibly break down as volumes increase. It can be really helpful for simulation as well as historical reads. There's also a need for conformance checking. If I improve the process or change it, does it still conform to our expected behavior or a new design? And I would propose that this is maybe more interesting in a world with RPA, where rather than orchestrating a new process, I might have automated pieces of the process. And then I want to check, are we actually still following the process? And I can use process mining as a way to do that conformance checking. And finally, you can look at variant analysis, right? Compare different event logs, right? Different this week versus last week, or this market versus that market, and see how the processes that are actually being run on the ground, how they might differ, and see if I can find opportunities for improvement or standardization or deviation. So now the question is, okay, how do I make all that magic work, right? Always the catch with a new technology is there's some requirement, right? Because so what do I need to make it work? The answer is you need system logs across various applications and platforms that generate and log events against the tasks or activities and the users and resources involved in the process. So if you use SAP for a bunch of stuff, but you use Oracle Financials, you may need both logs from SAP and Oracle to make it work, right? And what you want to do is produce or transform that data into an event log, ideally XCS format, so that you can import it into a variety of process mining tools. And we're going to show you a quick demonstration of one of those tools. It's an open source tool called Aprimore or Aprimore. I'm never sure if it's if you pronounce the last syllable or not. And the last bullet is really key, right? The real work is on data preparation to feed your process mining tools. So whenever we have someone ask us for help in process mining, what they really are asking for help with is the data preparation. And then at the end, how do I analyze what I got out of it? Like, so once I have the data, how do I make sense out of it? And we certainly can excel at helping you with both of those, but you'll see some interesting cases where someone say, well, I want to do process mining. So what I need is someone who is an expert on these 15 legacy systems that we have to pull the data out. And you just can't find the one person who knows all of those things all at the same time to an equal level of expertise. And my advice is, look, data integration is a thing, and it's something that we at BP3, our team members, and other teams have done for many, many decades, right? So it's just something you power through. If we were building a process for you and it had to integrate to those systems, we'd figure it out. If we have to pull the data out to feed process mining, we'll figure it out. All right, a bit about the event log. You need a case ID, something to identify that all of these activities are related, say to one customer order or one financial transaction or whatever it is. You need a timestamp. There's some additional data that can be included for tagging or sorting. If you want to reason about the person involved, right, or people involved, you need a resource tag and a name, right, a tag for the name of the activities. So if you do all that, then process mining software will generate a process map for you. And rather than talk about this map, if you've seen BPMN before, you recognize this is a variation on BPMN, a slight simplification of the standard notation. And you get a sense for how the process works. But let's watch a demo here in a minute of that. One other note, there's another technology, that's getting a lot of press over the last year or two that I'll, for example, Pega calls workforce intelligence. There are a couple other names floating around for it, but the basic idea is that it monitors, instead of system logs, right, handing it the SAP logs, it instead resides on your laptop as a user, and it keeps track of everything you're doing. So what you get is process mining more about system logs and events versus workforce intelligence approach, which is more about individual user activity. And so I'll get what happened in SAP versus how much time you're spending emailing things around about SAP, the work you're doing in SAP. It'll also give you stuff like, how much time they spend on Facebook or browsing, shopping on Amazon versus doing their work, right? So it is technology that has some controversy because, it tracks everything you're doing while you're doing it. And it has value, right? You get these footsteps of what someone does to get their job done. But it also has some other things to make sure you're thinking about and just understand that at least for the duration of collecting that data, which you might just do for a pilot period for a few weeks, that there's a little more invasiveness, involved in that. And that the kind of process information you're getting is really what that person does, not what the whole company or the process is. All right, let me hit play on this demo. this is sort of the feature I always love, is the ability to look at how it impacts people within the process versus how it impacts the process activities. All right. I apologize for the volume on the music. I understand that we might have woken everybody up.
Fully awake now. Yep. Cheers.
Yep.
I'm awake. Yep.
Yep. Well, if the coffee didn't do it, the volume on our video.
I'm drinking Stewart's coffee. I'm good. I'm awake.
That's right. So, Lance, I mean, to me, this brings up, if I can do all this automated, right? And I do see how it solves some problems for me that I've had in the past when I try to discover processes. Like, I remember doing a project where we could not figure out what was going on in the system. We had to interview people in different roles, and they would get into almost fistfights over what the other person's job was, right? Because they didn't agree. But they're using the same mainframe system. And I'd say, well, can't we just talk to the guys who wrote this? And they're like, well, they're not around anymore. And like, no, really? Like, I mean, we could pay them a contract rate or something, just advisory. And they meant, no, those guys have passed on, right? They're in the, where coders go when they pass on into the next world. And, and that was a real wake up call of like, okay, how do we figure this out? But at the same time, I can see limitations in this sort of data driven approach, right? So, what's your take on how do you marry these approaches together?
Yeah, no, and that's a great question. And I think again, it's the next set of tooling that can be, extremely helpful. Most processes, that we see, what do you typically see in a process model that someone's handed to you? You will see basically, the boxes, the lines, the swim lanes. So in a process, there's much more to a process than who does what and, the boxes and the decisions and the activities. What you're looking for is who, what, when, where, and how much. Why is what you need to figure out, why it behaves a particular way. So again, when you talk about it that way, you need to be able to look at kind of the whole and the details in one shot, and data is data mining, process mining tooling, which is stuff that's relatively new but very powerful, that can help bridge that gap. And it depends on being pragmatic about it. How much do you really need to understand and know? And it may be in a situation, as Scott explained, we run into several times, especially with legacy systems or down-level systems, where there's not a very good understanding of the behavior between the human-to-human interactions and the human-to-system interactions, where this is kind of the Rosetta Stone or the keystone of the process, any particular system. So these things fit together really well. So when you don't have that kind of tooling or the data insight, you want to be able to marry this up and use more traditional discovery techniques. When I say traditional, only because they carry a name like Lean Six or voice of customer, voice of business, value stream mapping, or customer journey mapping. Give it another year or two, we're going to have another paradigm, guaranteed. But all of these techniques are, forgetting about the name or the label of them, these things are very effective in the right hands, and you take the discovery techniques, and we can get into it here in a second, and marry that up with something like process mining, then, again, if it makes sense and it's practical and pragmatic to do so, put these things together, and it could save a lot of time and even increase the confidence level of what's really occurring, in your various processes.
Yeah, I mean, I know one thing that we've seen when it's a time just not to try to do process mining is when you just don't have time, right? If you want to get a best guess at discovery in a week, you probably don't have time to do the data preparation, right? And
That's
get
right.
access to the system and do that work, right? You just have to resort to interviews and talking to people. And you can get 40 hours of that done, regardless of how much, system integration work you can do in that time. And we've seen that happen before, where the timeline just dictates that we have to give up on certain approaches that are technically sound but take more time. But when does it make sense to go back into the toolbox and use something like Lean Six? Because I read Dilbert comics and they say it's dead. So
Well, it
says
hasn't, yeah, I don't know. Well, it hasn't been replaced with anything. And again, it's evolved. I think if you're back to your point, and I mentioned before about being pragmatic about something, it does come down to, what is good enough, right? I mean, most process problems that are out there aren't at the, highly complex, highly sophisticated. We're trying to eke out 0.2% additional yield or productivity, right? And these kinds of realities, right? You don't need to back up a bus, unload 15 people, spend 4.5, 5 months just doing discovery and interviewing and that kind of thing. You want to do things a little bit quicker, right? And it makes sense to do so. These are when you start to look at these kind of techniques, right? Again, it's not practical to get that kind of data, then these would fit fine. And you can measure this in days to weeks, not weeks to months to do it.
Right. What about something like value stream mapping, right? Like that's a term a lot of people have heard, but maybe don't really know. Like, when would I even do that?
Yeah. So value stream mapping, it's communication art. It's another technique versus BPMN. But in general, in value stream mapping, what you're actually trying to do is you want to be able to see the whole and the details in one shot, as I mentioned before. And you're doing that because you're trying to identify in the process what are considered value add, what's considered non-value add, what's maybe considered required non-value add, and what those things are. Value add is basically, these various tests that get run. There's only 3 of them for something that would be defined technically as value add, which is it's done right the first time. The customer is willing to pay for it, right? It's a transformative thing in the process, and that the item itself, whatever it may be, it could be an order, it could be a claim, it could be any number of things, an update to a patient record. It's transformative in that it evolves through the process. That's value add. Non-value add is what they call just pure waste, right? So that's rework, overproduction, wait time. These are kind of the waste areas.
Yeah.
That doesn't have value that is required because of regulatory reasons or company risk, corporate risk profiles. They want these kind of control systems in place. So value stream mapping is a technique for that value stream analysis, value add versus not.
Right. And I think another element that's maybe hard to pull out in an automated way is really customer journey mapping, right? There's some elements that get tracked in your system, but a lot doesn't. So what are your thoughts about how to bring that into a process discovery approach?
Well, it's again, understanding that processes, they're never disconnected. There's always a link there. And this is why we see a lot of things happening where, companies may be, in various departments improving their own specific, processes that, they were responsible for. And the thinking is the sum of the parts make the whole, meaning if everyone's doing some work on each one of these steps in the value stream or in this process, well, then the world's going to be better. Well, and it typically is not true at all because the goal is different, right? What the business is looking for, what the company is looking for. And it could be a increased customer experience or customer SaaS scores, NPS, whatever it may be. And just doing these sum of the parts don't necessarily make a difference there, right? Customer journey mapping would be, I want to understand what my area is and what everyone else's area is related to what that customer experience and journey is, right? And it's never linear. It's not like there's a start point and an end point because it's a circle, right? It's a circle. It always comes back. And for the customer journey, you can overlay that On top of value stream mapping, you could do it in and of itself in isolation from a value stream map. But in general, these are techniques to kind of understand what your correlation or causation is to that customer experience. And again, plopping that down on, again, communication art, right? Whether it's you're doing value stream mapping, other kind of lean flow notation, or BPMN, you could plop this stuff in on that.
Right. Another area that we've talked about, and we've been involved in projects around this, are, I have a process, but we're planning to double revenue, and I know the current process will break, right? So, I think we listed out a couple of things that people often want to design new processes for, right? Or to operate within. Do you want to pick and choose out of this group, which one you want to focus on?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's different, typically, going back to the sum of the parts equal the whole, right? There's certainly typically an end game, right? And it's going to be some financial model. It could be revenue generation or revenue protection or cost avoidance, cost savings, or some form of risk mitigation, right? But there's usually very discrete financial models, and you may see both sides of the ledger, right? And those are certainly the most valuable processes to deal with, is if they do hit both sides of those ledger in some form. So, again, back to customer journey mapping, if you're looking for higher customer satisfaction scores, you're going to be doing customer journey mapping with that, right? If you're looking for increased profitability, well, typically, the first thing you do is look at where costs are versus where revenue could be, right? There's the aspirational, new products, launching new products, things of that nature. But then there's the overall cost structure. Let's remove waste. Increased profitability, value stream mapping would be something that you would probably typically look at that for that. Removing the rework, same sort of thing. Doubling my revenue, that could be something along the lines of any mix of the above, right? Because usually on the revenue side, it will have to do with some kind of, enhanced offering, new service line, new product line. It could be, a bank could issue, a new class of credit cards, you name it. So these kinds of things typically involve multiple disciplines to, ascertain how do I go from where I am today to doubling revenue. And then there's, revenue leakage, which is a problem for a lot of companies, which is different than cost avoidance. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have to think there's some cases where, doubling requires effectively constraint, reduction, right? Or relieving constraints that prevent you from, either fulfilling that kind of revenue.
Sure.
Or doing it profitably.
Right. There's a notion of whole thing around theory of constraints that talks about subordinating constraints. Actually remove. It's basically all about eking out the highest level of utilization you can. You feed a constraint with the cleanest work to get the most out of it. Then decide, is that enough, or do I actually need to completely remove the constraint?
Right.
So this is a good chance for our next poll question. So what metrics does your company use to measure process? And it's a multiple choice, so there might be more than one answer there. Generally, I guess there will be more than one answer to Lance's poll.
Right. And Krista, I forgot to ask, when you're running these polls, are you sharing the results so everybody sees them?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I noticed there was a button for me to do it, but I wanted to just double check.
Don't push buttons you're unsure of.
That's right. And there's a big red button.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, pretty balanced.
That's interesting.
View on that poll result. As you can all see, the majority of respondents are, actually focused on a combination, right? Each one got a majority result. Right?
I think time is interesting because in the trifecta of, cost, quality, and delivery being time, of all the things that you actually can tweak and modify and work with, time is the one you can't get back. It is typically the most precious resource in that triad, and the one that, obviously you want to put the most attention on.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Potentially. Sometimes it's not about time.
Yeah, we've seen cases where people over optimize on time and they actually end up hurting the customer experience, and it ends up, backfiring. But
Right.
yeah. Well, Lance, there are a couple other thoughts, or slides to talk about maybe in terms of, discovery in the context of taking on these sort of in the digital age, right, and rethinking our business. Do you want to lead us through a couple of these thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, and this is profiled after an established pharma company, but this could be um, literally any company, your company. Um, the world is the world, reality is reality, and nothing's perfect. But in this particular, scenario, understanding kind of the breadth of what you're attacking is important. There is always the risk of doing something that's so myopic that the real value and yield of it is tenuous to ascertain, to try to figure out, and certainly not necessarily a good springboard. And of course, you hear the other side of the pendulum, which is, well, you don't want to boil the ocean either. So it's like, an example of understanding, the problem statement is pretty key here, because if you had a problem statement that says, hey, I really want to reduce our batch time from 24 hours to 12 hours, and that's the whole project, because we feel like that's going to provide something that may be too narrow, right, of a scope or yield. At the same time, if you have a problem statement that says, we want to improve the HR onboarding globally for our company. Well, globally, that's a good indication that that's a real broad type of problem statement. So when you look at these things, you kind of figure out what are the problem areas and be able to codify that in a statement. And I know it sounds almost pedantic to sit there and say, well, really, how much is a problem statement, a paragraph, going to keep me, on the right track or whatever else? And I'm telling you, it is absolutely critical to have the right problem statement, because that will influence all of the different directionally where you could go, but keeping you really on the rails of what is going to be important and where you should actually focus things.
I think that point you made, Lance, is so important, right? Framing a question or framing the problem affects every other decision you make.
Everything.
Right? And
it's everything.
I've often been confronted by decisions that I find really untenable, right? Like someone asks me the question, and in the way they've asked it, there's no good answer. But if I can take a step back and reframe the question, then there are good and distinctly different answers, right? And so I think that framing is critical.
Yeah, and when you see here, like, the EX issue, employee experience issue, employees don't believe in our transformation that we've attempted now 2 or 3 times. It's the digital illusion, versus digital transformation. And I'm not even sure I'm not hedging. I don't like the word transformation. Looking to transform. They're looking for relief, right? They're looking for flexibility and options in what we do. And that's our life, that's our work, right? We need to grow and defend market position or CX issues. The healthcare providers in this case, aren't served. Now, all of these things are effects typically, right? They're an effect of a root cause. And in process design engineering, that's actually what you want to tackle and try to understand. Normally there's more than one root cause, but there's usually not a dozen, is to understand what is the absolute root cause, because these are all effects. People experience these effects. And in process design and discovery, certainly in process discovery itself, the goal is to understand root cause or root causes. You can't stop at events and effects, right? This happens. People will patch that stuff and band-aid it because they feel like hitting the root cause may be too hard. Or that's, the problem. The reason why we can't fulfill our deliveries on time every 5 days is because sales is treating the world like Burger King, and they can sell any configuration and guarantee anything they want, and we just have to deal with it. So we're going to improve our process to be able to deal with it. You're never going to get ahead of that, right? You're never going to get ahead of it until you're able to do that sales merger here, as an example. Yeah, and the express needs. I think when you interview folks, you're not just trying to get the sense of, all right, well, how does work for you? You also want to get what the experience is for them, because they may be doing a particular task or function, let's say, that no one's happy about. We all have something in our jobs that, you know, we really would love if we didn't have to do it. You know, time and expense, anybody, right? It's a drag. But understanding what, you know, what and how that actually fits into the whole. It's like, you're asking this of me. I'm doing this task. I'm doing this function. I'm trying to understand what's in it for me. They may get a better understanding of it if they understand how they fit in the whole, whether it be the customer journey, you know, customer experience initiative that everyone's trying to elevate, or it could be employee experience that, you know, a company is smart enough to realize, hey, we're talking about this customer experience stuff, but unless we really give a better experience for our employees in general, this is a lost cause, guys. We're going to hit a wall. We'll only have incremental improvement, not kind of breakthrough improvement that we all envision. Express needs are an important way of understanding that through discovery and codifying those out.
Right. I think that's very true. And I like the way you give examples of how the kinds of things that get expressed that you capture.
Yeah, I mean, this is, you know, this is everyone's work. Well, man, you know, here's our ambition, and we're going to do this and this and this. And, you know, the notion is we need to increase our NPS by, you know, 5 or 6 percentage points in a year. And then, you know, you hit the reality of it. So you've invested in that new, you know, front end, you know, whether it be a website or a commerce vehicle or mobile app or whatever it is, and man, it's going to be killer. And then things don't go the way you hope, and from a customer's standpoint, and that's when the customer gets to meet your operational reality. They get to see it and experience it themselves. Airline travel, ever, you know, back when we were flying, you know, miss a flight or the flight got canceled. Well, how good is your app now? Most people just throw onto Twitter, hey, I'm stuck over here. You know, and there's a line in customer service, you know, it's 25, 50 people deep, and I need to get home. Right? I mean, you know how it goes. So you're everything you experience, you know, be it in the mobile app world or online, whatever your medium is, whatever device, whatever time, wherever you're at, there are edges to that. And actually, if you think about it, can I design the process in such a way that I can enhance the value? I can take care of the corner cases I know is really going to create dissatisfaction for the employee and for the customer, right?
You know,
Customer
Lance,
service agent. Oh, man.
Yeah, no, this reminds me of, you know, several times we've talked to clients where that really part of helping them was understanding their brand, right? And their promise to cut, you know, effectively the promise their brand is making to their customers. So understand that brand promise. And then we look at the operations and you can understand why they're asking for help,
Right.
because their operational capability does not live up to the brand promise. So it's about, let's deliver a process for you that delivers that brand promise to your employees and to your customers. Because what you're doing today isn't doing it, right?
That's right.
And if you have a brand that says, you know, for example, my furniture is amazing, and you should buy it and use it, and it looks amazing in your living room, and it looks amazing in the catalog, and we can customize and do all these things, that's great. But if the operations don't live up to that brand, it undermines everything. And,
Yeah, that's right.
And it happens all the time when you have a great product, but as your company grows, you don't have a chance to go back and revisit to have a great operation to support it. Look at that.
Right.
In the interest of time, Lance, let's get Andrew engaged here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Got Andrew Perra joining us, and I'm going to skip ahead. There we go. Want to talk about BPMN, and Andrew runs engineering for us. He runs a big part of our services operation in terms of how all of our employees and team members in the U.S. deliver our work for our clients. Many of you have worked with him. If you're on the line, you've worked with him, and you've worked with people on his team for sure. And so, Andrew, let me, without any further ado, I will stop sharing and let you take over sharing.
And Andrew, while you make that transition, we'll just go ahead and use this time to launch our next poll. Are you currently using BPMN in your business?
Excellent timing, Krista.
I do love one of the comments we got in the chat was that I read Andrew's responses on workflow questions all the time. I really appreciate the time he takes and his writing detail. Andrew is a prolific
Well, what I
person all
love is
over.
when I go to some other site, for a vendor, for, random website, and I find one of Andrew's answers on that site, helping people figure out how to implement process and how to think about it the right way. It's kind of funny. He is everywhere.
All right, guys, I'm trying to make sure that's the one I want to share. Is my desktop showing? Keeps popping in the wrong screen.
So far, it's showing a black screen for me.
Yeah, I've got a black. Okay, I have.
Now I see a desktop with the island.
Yeah.
Catalina
Perfect.
Island.
So I'll go ahead and share the results of this poll. So, Andrew, it looks like you have a pretty educated group here. About 66% of people are currently using BPMN in their organization. Only 34% said no. So let's see if BPMN is still a thing.
All right. So is the slide showing correctly?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay. So yeah, BPMN, is that still a thing? Scott, Lance, and Krista asked me to cover this topic for you. And more importantly, is it still important to automation work within the enterprise? So before we talk about BPMN, how important it is or isn't within the enterprise and automation, let's first frame exactly what we're talking about. So the first question is, what is BPMN? Quite simply, BPMN, these acronyms are not fun to say over and over again, so I will stumble here. But it stands for Business Process Modeling Notation. So now that we've cleared that up, the people who aren't using it all know exactly what it is and we can just move on, right? Maybe not. So let me go just a little bit deeper with regards to BPMN. So again, Andrew, what is BPMN? Well, it's an example of what's known as a domain-specific language, which is just more jargon, so I'm not helping you yet. So you don't really know what that means either. So let's go a little bit deeper. What is a domain-specific language? A domain-specific language is generally contrasted with general languages or general-purpose languages. English is a general language. It can be used to convey or obfuscate information on a very wide range of topics. From a programming perspective, most well-known languages are considered general languages and not domain-specific. C, Java, JavaScript, Ruby, these can all be used to create solutions across a full set of domains. A domain-specific language is one that is tailored to convey a very specific types of information or solve a very specific set of problems. SQL, or simple query language, is an example of a language that is focused on one thing, accessing data in a relational database. So, BPMN is a language specifically designed to capture business process solutions using a notational approach. That's what we're talking about today. Now, let's take a moment and talk about the advantages to using BPMN. First, it's graphical or notational. There are lots of examples. We've all heard a picture's worth 1,000 words and similar sayings. There are a lot of examples where the common belief is that representing data in a graphical manner is far superior to using prose. If you were going to build a house and asked the architect to give you a copy of the plans for the house, and they handed you a set of hundreds of pages of prose write-up, you'd probably think they may not know what they're doing, and you wouldn't want to pick that design. An architecture diagram is an example of a domain-specific modeling language. And as you sort of intuitively grasp, you can understand what that model is conveying much more easily because it's graphical than if it was just written prose. While architecture diagrams aren't today used to automate construction, there is a domain-specific notational language represented there. Just as you wouldn't hire an architect who wrote up their design in prose, if someone describes their process like this, instead of like this, it is likely that their design is open to confusion, misinterpretation, and honestly is going to be very difficult for people to understand. Another advantage of a modeling language is that it unlocks a variety of tools. Now, while my handwriting in this may be very difficult for you to comprehend, especially through a WebEx or Zoom, a BPM compliant diagram can be created with just some simple drawing tools. By preference, prior to everything that's been going on, whiteboards were commonly used in our office when people needed to get to an agreement. While electronic tools are useful and are recommended, for collaboration in the moment while in a room and reaching consensus, whiteboard and marker is likely far more useful than attempting to convey every detail you're trying to capture by writing down words. Another advantage with BPMN is that it is standards-based. This means that if you're using a diagram to capture and document a process, the execution following that diagram should be consistent. This is true if you're just using the diagram to manually track your steps, or if you've automated the entire process in a tool. All the tools that are BPMN compliant have the same understanding of what the diagram represents. If you're attempting to capture a process and you're not using BPMN, especially if you're using a vendor-specific tool, you're likely to have a problem if you ever want to try to move that process that you have captured into a different technology. The last advantage I want to talk about is the fact that BPMN is constrained. While you may not initially think of a language being constrained as being an advantage, it can be considered one. Here is an example of someone's attempt to capture a process without the use of BPMN, using simple drawing tools. Again, the tool that was used is a generalized tool that could capture any sort of drawing you wanted. There are any number of problems with this representation. Where does the process actually end? Who's responsible for the various steps? Who are all the participants? How do we decide which step is followed after hitting the artificial intelligence step? The fact is that since BPMN is constrained to solving only process problems, it forces you to capture this information correctly and clearly. And once captured that way, the solution can be well understood. These constraints are also good because if you are attempting to capture or solve a problem and you find that you cannot represent that problem accurately in BPMN, then this is a strong indicator that you may not be solving a process problem. Okay, so BPMN, it's been declared dead many, many times by various people. Is it in fact dead?
So let's go ahead and see what our participants think. So we'll go ahead and launch a poll and say, do you believe that BPMN is dead? We have a good question in the Q&A right now. What is DMN, or decision modeling notation, and why do you need it if you already use BPMN? And I think that you just answered that, Andrew, so if you just wanted to repeat yourself there.
Well, yeah, so it is another modeling notation, and it's a domain-specific language for capturing decision data. So if you are trying to figure out a decision, how do we make this decision? What are the right steps? What's the data required for it? Then DMN is likely the right tool to be doing that, especially if you want to capture it in some sort of graphical representation that people can understand relatively easily. We actually very frequently wind up having these two technologies intersect one another, because when decisions in a process become complex, something like something like a decision solution is what we'd want to move towards, especially if the business wants to have better control over how that decision evolves over time.
So,
All right, so there's,
go
go ahead,
ahead.
Chris.
So it looks
So-
like everyone pretty much agrees here that BPMN is very important. I think there were two people that just wanted to put a fork in it. So, you know, but then we have
All right,
another
so-
question here before we go further, which is, can BPMN handle case or ad hoc use cases, or do you need to use CMMN, which is case modeling notation, case management modeling notation?
I'll actually, that touches on a point that I'll make in a little bit, but case and process are different things, and you should use the appropriate tool for the problem that you're trying to solve. A lot of the process solutions have brought in some case entities, but if what you're really, really doing is case, you very well may want to look at a case modeling tool.
I think you're going to hit the next question in this section, but what level of detail do my BPMN diagrams need to be? I think you're about to hit that, so I'll leave that one, and we can come back and circle back and answer that one. So go ahead, Andrew.
Okay. So when I was researching all this, trying to pull things together, W. Edwards Demings, who was a big person early in both QA and process, had a quote that I really liked was, if you cannot define what you're doing as a process, you don't actually understand what you're doing. And he was mainly coming from a quality standpoint. So we do need to understand process. But I said, no, BPMN is not dead, but let's prove it. So let's start with the fact that very few technologies are ever actually replaced. One researcher took a Sears catalog from the late 1800s with trying to see how many of the things in the catalog were no longer manufactured. In every case that they looked at in that catalog, they were able to source a current manufacturer for the item in question. I've often heard someone making a snide comment about buggy whip manufacturers. But the reality is they're still out there today and creating buggy whips. And I'm willing to bet if you're someone who is actually doing the sort of work or races where buggy whips are required, they probably get very pricey and very specific. I've also encountered gardeners from some previous generations who swear that this is still the best way to get the dirt out of their gardening clothes. So given that we can find these things on Amazon, we can see that they haven't gone away, even though there's other options. COBOL, in our own domain space, COBOL is now over 60 years old and had an OO enhancement added to it within the last 10 years. We may all agree that it shouldn't be in use, but the reality is it's still here. Fortran is almost 70 years old. I couldn't believe that when I found that out. And some math professors still insist that it's better for what they do than any modern language. So this brings up a good point. COBOL and Fortran aren't being heavily used today, but we do have replacements for them. So what are the replacements that may be BPMN killers? So this is sort of queued up. Case. Most case management practitioners use case management modeling notation, or CMMN, to capture the details of the case. And case management certainly has its place. And there are very many similarities between case and process because each of them deal with allowing users to understand the tasks to be done and execute those tasks. However, the methodology behind the two is greatly different. Whenever anyone asks me about case, I actually immediately think of the television show House, where they are actually working a case. In the case situation, an expert practitioner has a number of different things they could choose to do, and they select from there the appropriate ones based on the data that they've already understood. It is a very much an expert-driven type of approach. Process, on the other hand, puts most of the weight of deciding what is to be done next on the process itself, and asks the participants to know how to execute each of their tasks very well into a great level of detail. but doesn't make them have to understand what comes next or what comes before, with the exception of the cases where we ask a human to make a decision because we're unable to capture that decision appropriately using an automated technique.
Andrew,
so case didn't kill.
If I can add one thought to that, if you're sitting at home and you've written code before in various languages, one analogy to use is, case management is declarative in approach, more like Prolog, whereas BPMN is more directive in approach, so more procedural. And for some people, their brains will naturally gravitate toward one way of representing a problem or the other. And for the most part, I think you could represent fully both kinds of problems with CMMN or with BPMN, but you may find that one or the other feels a lot more natural to you, or that the problem fits better in one or the other, regardless of which one feels more natural.
All right, so what's the next BPMN killer? I've heard RPA. Some analysts have been saying that. And while process is in the name of RPA, it's sitting right there, most RPA solutions today are focused on solving what BPM view as individual tasks within a process. And we, BP3, actually have delivered many RPA solutions that are behaving more like business processes, with coordinating tasks across multiple bots and even with a human involved to achieve their business goal. It isn't a natural fit for that tool. It actually feels a lot like where the BPM solutions were approximately 16 years ago, before they really started adopting BPMN. To that point, I actually expect to see most RPA vendors, as they move into a more business process focused space, to start to adopt BPMN as their modeling approach, because they're able to leverage the 20+ years of discovery and academic research that's gone into it.
So Andrew, this is a good chance for a Q&A that we have, is how do I stop my BPMN diagrams from just being documentation that I need to maintain?
I actually touch on that on the end of this as well. But so when you are looking at a process and its maturity, there's two things that are important in understanding about your processes. You have a process if it's been documented, or if it's been standardized. If you have one of those two, you have a process. If you don't have either, it's not standardized and it's not documented, you probably don't really know what your process is. And you're back in that Deming, you don't really understand what you're doing. If you want to move out of the pure documentation, you need to make sure that you're living it, and you need to examine where are the areas that automation makes sense. So I have seen documented processes that when you get to the people who are working the process, they actually don't even know that the process exists. The analogy I always think of is one comedian has a whole routine about being an ant on a car tire, right? The person's an ant on a car tire. They don't even realize that they're on a car tire until it crushes them. Same thing with these workers. They don't know that they're in a process unless it winds up affecting them in a negative way. So we need to make sure that if there's a process, we're not just documenting it, but we're living it, and that we're empowering people to figure out how can we make this process better, where are the places that we can come in and improve it, and it's not just shelf documentation. Okay. So our next RPA killer, our BPMN killer, sorry, I was looking at my screen. Low code, no code. So interestingly, when I went out to look for low code, no code, the first things I get are these images that actually look a lot like BPMN. But a lot like RPA, I don't think process is in their DNA. I think when you're using low code, no code to solve problems, you're still in that making an individual task better, much like RPA is, or maybe a series of automated tasks, but you're not really coordinating a true process with multiple participants, multiple systems, and those sorts of things. If these tools actually grow into that point, I would expect their diagrams to start to become BPMN compliant, because we have yet to find a better way to really represent those things. the big question there is if they actually feel that solving those problems is in their tooling and in their domain space. The last BPMN killer, walled garden solutions. Many of these large enterprise software companies have started adding process to their solutions, but process is not really in their DNA. And even with some of these who BP3 have actually consulted with in order for their product owners to understand how to add process to their solution, we're seeing resistance to leveraging the 20+ years of academic research on how to properly capture business solutions. I think Scott and Lance will be touching on a lot of these things in more detail, but if these vendors are resistant to using BPMN for capturing your process, I would question whether they properly understand the domain space that they're trying to solve. So I hope this actually lends people to understand BPMN in a little more detail and its importance in process automation and the importance in using it to improve your organization and their processes. I think that's it for my presentation.
Cool. So, Andrew, for some of these tools, like my impression is that they don't use BPMN to represent process, right? How do you even think about implementing, a process with tools that don't use BPMN?
Well, like I said, actually, if we go all the way back to the Lombardi software version 3 and 4 that you and I use, Scott, even though there was no way to get a BPMN diagram, you can wind up solving a process problem with almost any tool. We could solve it with a general purpose language. The big concern I have with doing that is it hasn't been solved in a way that it can be conveyed to someone who isn't deeply nested into that tool. So if someone asks you, even in the cases where we've used RPA to implement what effectively winds up being a business process, none of our people can hand a business diagram that's part of the tooling to the customer to show what they are. Interestingly, I know that our RPA group has actually started using some of the BPMN tooling to document the process before they implement the RPA so that they can show that interaction and where the different bots are going to participate, how we solve the overall problem. So that's why I think, it's just the right place to do it, even if you wind up having to implement using a different technology.
Right. Well, that's great commentary, and thank you, Andrew. I'd like to but we've got Jeremy ready, but before I get to Jeremy, I've got just a couple slides to kind of tee it up. And so I'm going to move through those quickly in the interest of time. And let me share that screen with you guys. Jeremy, just hang with us for another moment or two. Andrew started talking through some of the possible replacements, and I would say, as we move to building the phase, right, and we kind of think about everything in three, right? So when we think about implementing process automation at BP3, we often would talk about it in terms of start it, solve it, scale it, right? So we do the discovery, start it. We, then we build something, and that's the solve it phase, right? We're just going to solve the problem. And then you think about scaling it. How do I go and take this technique and approach further and out into the wild? And when you look at implementation choices, things you could do to implement those processes, right? One is status quo. I don't implement any new software, right? I just do the best I can with the systems I've got. And I retrain people. I tell them how to use the system a different way, how to do their job a different way. This is frankly what people did for, many, many years before process software came about, before decisioning software came about. Another option, and it gets all the shimmer because, it's very hot right now, right, is the idea of doing low code, no code, right? You don't have to write any code. Everyone can do this stuff. It's very appealing from that point of view because it seems like literally anyone can be a developer. That's the idea. I would say that, the challenges with low code or no code is that because they are general tools, right, they tend to solve general problems, and when you have a specific problem, they don't do a very good job of it. And there are little things to watch out for when you're looking at something, that feels like a low code, no code answer. One is, did the folks who are building that low code, no code solution, or they're offering it to you, what did they build their solution in, right? They probably didn't build it with a low code, no code tool. So the takeaway is, if they can't build their own software with it, there are limitations on what you can build, right? It's not literally anything that you can build or should be built that way. Or there are better ways to build certain kinds of applications that are using different platforms. I think another issue to worry about is death by property sheet in these kinds of applications. And you'll see it when they pull up like the 40th property sheet to show you how to implement your process in their platform, then you're in that vein. And if you hear the word scripting, right, that is a keyword that means code, but it sounds less dangerous than coding, right? And so when you see a property field in an interface, and then they're starting to type some JavaScript in there, some other kind of scripting language, okay, you're writing code now. And I think at the end of the day, sort of my simplification on this is simply that if it's complicated enough, then code is actually the right way to solve the problem. And if it's not complicated enough, then a low code or no code solution will really work well. But it takes a lot of experience and judgment to pick that right. And the other comment I'd make is that when you have a purpose-built, a very narrowly defined tool that is low code or no code, it's easier to hit the mark, right? Because you have a defined audience, they're using the tools in a specific way, and then you can really nail the problem down. All right, let me hit the right button here. Another option is RPA, right? I've got my revised process. Some of that process is simply automating stuff that people on our team are doing, and I can get that specific task automation. I think that's effective. The things to watch out for, obviously, are that the connections between those activities are not necessarily managed or orchestrated if you don't have an overall process driving it. And you may want to use something like process mining to check that actual behaviors in the field or in the wild are matching the design of the process you produced. So you may need a way to validate or check for compliance that you might not need if you had an orchestrating entity driving it. Now, there are more implementation choices because 3 isn't enough, right? You can also go with the walled gardens. Andrew talked about that a little bit. I think there are a number of issues with walled garden implementations. I think key thing to me, I apologize, I've got a couple notes to keep me on track. But a key thing to me is that, you could use Salesforce, ServiceNow, Workday, SAP. You can use these things to solve process problems. And in fact, a lot of companies have decided on a Salesforce first or ServiceNow first. Like, if there's a new problem, implement it in that platform first, regardless of how well it fits, right? We've decided on what our implementation platform for applications is in general. And we've seen things like this before. In the 90s, it was SAP for many American companies. It was implement on SAP, otherwise don't do it. And the challenge is that these systems at their core are systems of record with the ability to edit and manage the data they're in, right? And so the point of any process inside these systems is generally to react to a change inside that system, run a process inside that system, change data within that system, right? There's no leaving, Salesforce or ServiceNow to affect other systems. There's also often a limitation in terms of the volume or scale that can be handled, because if you write a process and you throw it onto Salesforce and you scale it up, if it impacts your ability to run Salesforce, that's your CRM, your sales system, right? So it doesn't isolate properly the concerns. And I think a core engineering principle that Andrew and our team fully believe in is that you have to separate process from your applications, and you have to separate decisions from your applications so that they can be addressed and improved and changed iteratively and independently of your applications. And those are things that walled garden approaches don't really address well. And finally, in the last two, there are things that are much more BPMN oriented, right? The DPA platforms, digital process automation platforms, and process engines, right? And really, the process engine is a slimmed down version of that DPA platform, where the platform will come with things, some elements of low code, right? Drag and drop UI, maybe drag and drop database definitions, things like that, which can be quite handy. But the process engine approach basically says, well, you solve that database problem the way you want, solve the UI problem the way you want. We're going to focus on delivering a great process engine to you, and then you can build it into whatever applications you're building. And I think those techniques are really independently interesting. And we certainly have built great solutions with all of these techniques for our customers. So this isn't about what's good or bad. It's really about understanding the limitations and how these decisions can affect the way you go forward with the process. Now, having said that, I think it'd be a great idea to talk to Jeremy Warren about his own experience, and how we provide processes for regular people at Keller Williams, where there are hundreds of thousands of real estate agents running around who are very entrepreneurial and they want to solve their own business problems. And in effect, part of Keller Williams' mission is to support those agents in pursuing their entrepreneurial dreams and building their business. And a few of the stats from Keller Williams that I've borrowed from a presentation Jeremy's given before. And Jeremy leads their automation effort. Jeremy, I'm going to stop sharing and cut over to just the panel now. Anything you say just to introduce folks who are listening to, what Keller Williams does and what your mission is to support them?
Right. Yeah. Hey, so great to be here. Thanks so much for having me. It's really good to see everyone. Right. So, Keller Williams made their name as kind of the largest real estate franchise in the world. And they've been around since, 1983. But in the past 3 years, we've really, kind of shifted completely to, digital automation, if you want to call it, and just, becoming a true technology company. So our goal at Keller Williams is to, just be a technology company that provides kind of an industry leading platform for real estate agents and consumers. So that means not just the real estate agents themselves, but also kind of the consumer, the everyday home buyer, give them an app that they can use to search for homes in their neighborhood and feed that data right back to the agent to help create, essentially the best experience possible.
Well, if you have to, really boil it down, what's the key problem that you're solving for a real estate agent?
So the key problem is kind of twofold. One is that real estate agents, it's a very self-starter type of business. Almost anybody can become a real estate agent with, a little bit of effort. So you have a very wide range of people who are different skills and different levels of technical literacy. So because of that, there's also a lot of disparate software solutions that are out there. So there's, real estate agents can kind of run their business in whatever way they see fit. And as they grow and they scale, eventually some of them find themselves having, 10 different software licenses for everything from managing their, marketing campaigns to, managing their contacts database to, kind of generating leads or marketing on Facebook. So basically the problem that we're trying to solve is create a platform specific to the real estate industry that kind of is the one-stop shop for, any agent. It's highly customizable. It's very specific to the real estate industry. And it's just kind of a CRM that the agents can use themselves to manage and, kind of optimize their business, as well as that they can, provide a consumer app that, all of their clients, people looking to buy houses can also use. And those are, kind of an interconnected experience that kind of feed data to each other and help create the best experience possible for buying a home.
No, that's great. I mean, you guys, I think one thing I love is you guys have a very clear mission, for how to help your agents. And, something that's really different is, when your agents adopt software, you're not forcing them to use it, right? Like they're actually independent business people. So you can't make them use it. Do they actually pay to use the process software you guys are rolling out?
Yeah, so they do, and kind of that's our goal is we have to kind of as a corporate entity we have to compete with all of the other software solutions and platforms that are out there, right? We have to compete with the MailChimps or the Twilio or whoever, and we do have partnerships with some of those companies, Mailgun, Twilio, Google and Facebook, right. Try to combine all of those things together. But yeah, we do have to compete and, with those and basically sell our software, to the agents and let them know that, using it is kind of the best experience possible for them.
Yeah, I think it's kind of liberating, right? Because, that people, if they're using it because they see value, right? Yeah. And if the rest of us, right, as we're rolling out solutions, if you just think about if your employees had to pay to use the software you're putting in front of them, would they, right? Would they pay for that instead of the old way or instead of some other alternate way of getting the job done? That's a really different lens to see it through, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's a kind of a funny, not too much off topic anecdote, but, we heard that, right when all of the COVID stuff hit, Google's kind of, can be famous for, sunsetting a lot of products and stuff like that. But basically everybody started using Google Meet, and they saw more improvements in Google Meet because all of their employees actually started using it when the COVID stuff hit,
Right.
So like in such a short amount of time, but that type of stuff definitely happens.
I completely believe it. Now remind me, how many agents are impacted by smart plans?
Right. Well, so Smart Plans is kind of an applet within Command itself, and so Command is the basically CRM. That's the agent-facing application. We do have a consumer app. It's a mobile app for the consumers, but Command is kind of the agent CRM, and Smart Plans is an applet within there that kind of is a more or less a workflow orchestrator across kind of the other different applets. So Keller Williams has about 180,000 real estate agents total. I'd say between 60 and 100,000 actually like use Command pretty regularly, and so somewhere around those have all used Smart Plans or tasks functionality, which is kind of what our little section of Command does at one point. So they're definitely kind of some use it more than others, but we've definitely seen kind of close to 80,000 or so unique users of just Smart Plans alone. Mm-hmm.
No, that's amazing. That's amazing adoption.
Yeah.
And I know I get emails from Keller Williams agents, some friends of mine, and at some point I started noticing they were sending me emails using Smart Plans, right? Like I could identify that's what it was coming from, and I started asking them about it. Hey, when did you start using this? And they were kind of like mind blown that this is something that we worked on together to produce for them. They're really kind of excited about it. I guess, it seems to me that it's been received really well and widely adopted. The numbers back that up. But how do you get all of these people to use process without telling them it's a process?
Right. So, I mean, definitely iteratively, we've been at this, I guess, kind of for a little over a year, but kind of the history of, Smart Plans is actually a little longer than that. Tried a number of different kind of low code solutions, kind of completely custom solution that wasn't workflow specific at all, to try to get this built, and definitely ran into some challenges as kind of a, young technology company does to an extent. So the way that we started was just doing templates. So we defined a couple of very static Smart Plans that were, built by very experienced agents at Keller Williams and had a lot of marketing input. But basically said this is the core of like what we want. And, we didn't give the agents the ability to customize them originally, but because they were pretty static, but we said, you can use these out of the box and they'll essentially, deliver value. And that's the first step that we'll approach. So then kind of once we, hardened up the application and, see how it was being used, kind of, we're able to get all of the kind of error handling scenarios, since these are long running scenarios, and we're basically orchestrating calls across, hundreds of different microservices, within our, infrastructure, then we, are basically able to kind of gradually open up the guardrails, and allow agents to do a little bit more dynamic customization. So basically it's kind of just, we give them a set of building blocks and we say that you can assemble those building blocks any way you want. The content of those building blocks, whether it be a task or an email or a text message, or, link it to another Smart Plan, anything like that. They have full control over that. And we've designed the workflow such that there are guardrails that kind of keep them in check from both a performance perspective and kind of a business rules perspective. But yeah, we've been able to kind of iteratively get to a point where they can kind of just build their own workflows.
So, Jeremy, and that kind of brings up this is a question I was actually asked earlier in the session today around citizen developers. I mean, that's what you have here. That's what these real estate agents are. They have.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the technology you provide is like any other platform. It could have been service. It could have been whatever, ServiceNow or anything else.
Yeah.
But because of what Command is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you basically enabled a citizen developer community already out there with the real estate agents. So they're not coders by trade, right? They sell homes. They try to get people in homes together, but they are building their application specific to them and the workflow specific to them around all things marketing and campaigns.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Absolutely. And the cool thing is that now we have, essentially kind of a whole command, library where agents who, you have, like I said, there's agents that have all sorts of different skill sets. So you have some of these agents that are very technically literate, and they are basically, you could call them the top, smart plans developers, right? And so what they essentially do is they build a smart plan and they say, this is the smart plan that I use, when I get a new contact. And this is the smart plan that I use when I'm following up from an open house. And they upload those to a community library that everybody has access to. And so we basically give, have a community library that has a 5-star rating system. We have download counts and everything, where if you're a new agent and you don't know how to use smart plans, or you don't know how to use this thing, and it's kind of a foreign concept to you, you can just go to the library and see, hey, here's the top downloaded plan. This one has the most stars. Bunch of people say that this is, an awesome plan. I can just download it and start using it and not really even know that there's, any sort of workflow or process behind it. You just know that that's what the top agents use and that they've had success doing that.
And so it's also fair to say, without that kind of system developer notion on the part of the real estate agents, there is no possible way you guys could have ever created every permutation of every part, right? I mean, that's just right
Absolutely
off the
not.
table.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely not. And yeah.
Yeah, so about scale, as part of adoption, as part of what capabilities are actually in the product, they are defining and building some of their own capabilities around this. And the governance that you have is really, like you said, the guardrails to kind of make sure that you're able to enforce and control so people can't really go off the rails with it.
Yeah.
A lot of ability to create.
Sorry, you broke up there a little bit at the end, Lance.
So the governance model that you have in Command and within Smart Plans, it really allows folks to be able to be creative without doing something that would jeopardize or create an issue that ultimately you may have to own, as at that point you're kind of IT support, right? Or at least some segment of the team is.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So the whole kind of tagline of Command is, by agents for agents, right? This is software, built by real estate agents, for real estate agents, and most of our requirements come directly from, the top performers, essentially, people that are, selling a lot of homes, and those are the model that kind of we encourage most of the other agents to follow. Like, if you want to be successful selling real estate, this is how you do. But 100%, we absolutely have to have the guardrails. And we had in a past implementation, before we started using Camunda and workflow, and before BP3 was brought on to kind of help with this implementation, they did have a bit of an issue where they kind of had a low code workflow system that they embedded kind of directly into the UI, and we had basically an agent apparently create a loop and generate like 100,000 tasks in like the span of a few minutes, and just brought down the whole system. So those guardrails are important, not just for for performance reasons and scalability reasons, but yeah, we do have to keep the agents in check, because there are some that would probably kind of go a bit crazy with it if we didn't.
I think that's a really good cautionary note for anyone who missed it, is that, that idea that, look, putting low code solutions into everybody's hands, you run a few risks, right, around governance and overproduction, and then also, just taking down the system, right? And by tailoring a solution to the real estate agents, right, you've both enabled people who really don't want to write it. They don't want to write their own solution. They want to leverage something. And you've enabled people who do want to write their own solution to really get that process, that symbiotic process of learning going, to learn from those best agents and turn that into software. So I think it's really kind of a nice virtuous cycle you guys have going there. I should give a minute for you to tell us, okay, like, it sounds good. The real estate agents have this relatively easy thing to do now. They can configure their process. They may not even know it's a process. You've made it that easy to use. Behind the scenes, what are you guys really using, right? Like, what's the architecture infrastructure kind of look like?
Yeah. So, I mean, behind the scenes, there's kind of a lot going on. The reason we settled on Camunda essentially was, just its flexibility and our ability to kind of, leverage this platform. Camunda has this awesome pattern called the external task pattern, where you can, essentially have, a worker that, runs outside of Camunda that can orchestrate a number of calls where, the actual processing of the tasks, right? So if we want to send an email, there's a couple things that we have to do. We have to get agent details. We have to get contact details. We have to get the email template that they want to send. We have to fill in any sort of merge tags that we need. And then we actually have to, kind of send the email. We have to write to the timeline, to the contact's timeline. So there's a number of essentially, steps that we have to do. And, when you're modeling a process like that, really, the step kind of there, for the agents is just send email, right? That's the step in the workflow. So, when we model the workflow, we have a couple of these building block steps. Say send email, send text message, create task, delay, link to another smart plan. So we have, a set of steps, but, the actual logic is essentially orchestrating, a lot of microservice calls across kind of our, our infrastructure. So we run in Google Cloud and everything is, kind of Kubernetes. We have everything Dockerized and kind of close to 300 microservices that run within command to kind of connect all this stuff together. So that's kind of, there's definitely a lot happening in the background.
It's very buzzword compliant
yes,
as well.
Exactly.
Hey, I got a couple of questions from the chat that I wanted to kind of run by you. One is a request not for right this second, but maybe see if I can get a commitment out of you to share. One of our attendees has asked, can we have a working example demo of how this works and what it looks like? Do you think we can later share a recording with our attendees?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's I think there's a couple of examples online and then yeah, we could do a short video. We definitely have access to that. So yeah, it'd be super easy to kind of share a demo. No issues with that. Yeah.
That would be awesome, and I think would be really appreciated. And we didn't make time for it today because we really wanted to talk about the business angle and how you guys think about this. Mm-hmm. But maybe the other question that was asked, I think, is there was an interesting angle around this, and it was about, if I'm using a low-code solution, how do I handle major upgrades? Mm-hmm. And I think the context of the question might have been more around IBM BPM, but just looking at how you guys have done it, when you have a major upgrade that you want to make, how do you think about the impacts to the real estate agent who has to define their whole workflow around the previous version, right?
Yeah.
How do you deal with both from a UI or an engine or a process point of view? How do those things interplay?
Right. No, so it's a great question, and it's something that we've definitely worked a lot on, this concept of how do you handle these process instance migrations or stuff like that. We've tried very hard to kind of avoid those. So we have kind of two different ways that an agent can interact with a smart plan. Once they have contacts that are actively running on a smart plan, if they want to actually edit it in flight, we allow them to open it up in what we call like a simple edit mode, where they can edit, they can't change the order of the steps or the number of steps, but that are in the plan, but they can change the content of each step, right? So if at step 4, you're sending a text message, then, they can change that text message, no problems. But, if they are, but then, they can make a kind of complete copy of that plan and kind of start from scratch and assemble things, in whatever way they see fit. But yeah, from an upgrade perspective, there's the platform upgrade, which is, generally, not too big of a deal. We haven't had any issues with updating like versions of our software. But yeah, for us, it's, if we ever introduce any breaking changes to the actual workflow itself. So we've built the workflow itself to be fairly abstract enough to where we're pretty confident that we're only going to be like adding steps. We haven't really taken anything away, but yeah, it's just kind of it's all business planning, and it just all comes down to essentially planning with with the business and doing the impact analysis and figuring out if this is something that you have to introduce breaking changes for, how you handle the migration of that stuff, and so it's really just comes down to general requirements gathering and business trade-offs for that.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a risk in general when you use a generalized low-code platform, right, that they might change their user interface paradigm or some other major feature. And I guess the thing that if you're going to produce a low-code solution, which effectively you guys have for your agents, one of the responsibilities you take on is if we produce a new user interface, that it is still configurable and we can bring the old configurations forward, if you will. right?
Yep,
So that,
definitely.
yeah, it looks different, but the functionality is preserved or brought forward as much as reasonable, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, one last question: how has, in your view, how has this project, and I shouldn't say project, really program around automation, how has this impacted Keller Williams' view of the value of process to their business?
So I mean, I think that it's something that they, that they saw the value of very, very quickly. So Smart Plan started off as just an agent. Each instance of a Smart Plan is an agent to a single contact. That's kind of an instance of a Smart Plan. But we're rapidly evolving what a Smart Plan is inside of Keller Williams and what workflow is inside of Keller Williams. So kind of the next step is and it's already being used today, but because Keller Williams is in a franchise model, we have, market centers, all around the US, and those are individual entities that, each person is kind of responsible for running. So we kind of have Smart Plans for market centers as well, where they can basically, how they actually run the market center or recruit agents to come onto their market center is kind of a whole workflow conversation. And, there's other areas like agent onboarding, right? With BPMN software, onboarding is one of the, age-old use cases. It's been around for forever, and workflow right there, just it fits right in. So we're starting definitely to see a lot of a lot of similar concepts and a lot of utility for kind of like a business automation platform within Keller Williams to do all sorts of things rather than just kind of what we built it for for the Smart Plans right now. Yeah.
Right. We have one more question from the audience. Lance, anything you want to jump in with before I
No,
present that? Yeah.
no. Just wanted to say thanks, Jeremy, again for that overview. That was awesome.
Awesome.
So I'll let you get the question answered.
All right, one more, and it is that you mentioned orchestrating hundreds of microservices. How troublesome was that, Jeremy?
We've definitely had no shortage of issues. I mean, so the biggest challenge for us for Smart Plans and what it really does actually is kind of handle errors and categorize errors, and because these are long running plans, and so just because just because the contact service was down on Tuesday at 12 o'clock doesn't mean the entire Smart Plan or workflow should end. So the biggest piece and the biggest hurdle for us was basically understanding how we wanted to categorize and handle errors and what our retry patterns essentially looked like, right? So it was essentially, Camunda makes this quite easy to do. Actually, we have kind of a very robust incident handling pattern where we can kind of categorize the types of errors that we get, understand if it's an error because the service was down or if it's a valid business error that that needs to be handled. And we just kind of build that right into our code and into our incident handling pattern as they come up. So we have a whole process now of categorizing how failures are generated, and if it's a new type of failure that we haven't seen, then we kind of go to the business and say, how do we want to handle this scenario? But that's just kind of an ongoing process. But yeah, I mean, it's microservices has their own like every software architecture, there's trade-offs, et cetera, and so it's no shortage of problems, but yeah, we've kind of evolved to basically handle those failures and kind of be pretty resilient towards any sort of failures that we see, and keep these plans running so that they don't just kind of end abruptly just because one service is down at some point.
Yeah.
Automating the automation.
Yep.
I will plug that tomorrow we're going to be talking about this. Of course,
Our dog has other ideas. This is the world we live in now, right?
And she is feeding the dog. Yes. Are you good now, Chris?
She has to wait probably
tomorrow
for the dog
we'll
to finish.
actually be talking about the microservices architecture and orchestrating hundreds of microservices. The FedEx guy shows up right at the most inconvenient time.
Yeah, it's
yeah.
it is interesting. It is something we see more and more, Jeremy, are these patterns around microservices and Docker and Kubernetes, and so just a lot of ways to achieve scale and velocity in the development process. But it also means we have to really think. I like the way you framed it. that it's not just a technical problem to overcome, but you're also having to work with the business about how to handle those issues the right for the business, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think for anyone listening, I mean, part of what we love about working with Jeremy, and for those who don't know, he worked with us for many years before going to Keller Williams to lead their automation team there. He is one of those unicorns that is very deeply technical and cares about the technical solution and all of those details, but he also cares about the business and the business value and the value that they're creating with process. And that is the thing that really drives a successful business process outcome, right? Or process automation outcome. Not to mention he grows a mean COVID beard, is how I understand. It's like a playoff beard, only in reverse. I think you wait till we get a vaccine and then shave. Is that the
pretty much that's the goal?
Well, Jeremy, I can't thank you enough for joining us.
Yeah.
As always, it is a pleasure to work with you and to talk to you about what you do and your craft. And I love the way Keller Williams thinks about, process, and I love the way they think about enabling the entrepreneurial spirit that is out there in their agents, in that family of agents. I think that's just really fantastic.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for having me. It's great to see you guys. And Keller Williams wouldn't be where they are right now with process without the help of BP3. And so really, kind of appreciate all you guys and kind of the awesome work that you do. And it's great to see everyone.
Thanks,
you
man.
bet.
Yeah. Thank you,
Jeremy. Well, we as a session today, we're a little over time, which is no surprise. If you know me and Lance, you know that we can occasionally go overtime. And just some final thoughts to wrap up. I think after talking through this, right, we do live in a world that still needs processes and operational excellence. You can hear it in the conversation with Jeremy how much it matters to their business, and in the questions that we got through Q&A. I think the other thing, we didn't really talk about this earlier, but I just want to leave you with some of these thoughts, is even digital first companies need process, right? There are a lot of massive operating companies that started in the 2000s, right? That started after the 1990s wave of process reengineering, that maybe were too small during the 2000s to really worry about implementing business process automation technologies at that point. But now they're big companies, right? And among those is, a little company everyone's heard of, Salesforce, right? Like they're a huge company now. But in the early 2000s, right, they were the no software company, and you don't need software or installs or any of that jazz. I will say there's some irony in that we had to do a Salesforce upgrade the other day, i.e. stop using Salesforce for 2 days to upgrade. I thought it's supposed to be SaaS, and you guys just do all this stuff for us, right? So, there's everybody has some work to do on process and operational excellence, even companies that we consider new, right? And another sort of funny thing is, Salesforce, which so many of us use, is older than BPMN, right? So, sometimes the UI looks like that. And the other takeaway is the technologies change, but business is about people. Business doesn't change as fast as technology. How you go to market, how you transact, all that stuff can change. But at the end of the day, it's so much about people and how you relate to each other and creating value for them in their lives. And process is a big part of that. I think RPA and AI are both game changers for process. And one comment I'll make about AI is that although we didn't talk about it a lot explicitly in this session, we did it on Monday. And so if you missed Monday's session, I definitely recommend you watch it. But a key element to many AI implementations is that it lacks a practical application, right? You apply it, you do a bunch of machine learning, and it can draw a bunch of conclusions. But what I want to do is then what, right? I have the conclusion, I have the insight, I now want to act on that. And that's where marrying AI with RPA or with a process puts it into your business operational context, right? So we can actually change the way your business operates using the insights we get from AI. I think the walled garden, the risk of putting your processes in walled gardens is to perpetuate the sort of siloed view of the world. My CRM system has processes, and my finance system has processes, my HR system has processes, and they don't touch each other. But if you think about situations like if I introduce a new product, well, that implies I need new organization in HR to support that product. I need potentially to charge for it differently in my finance realm, and I need to account for it separately in finances, both the revenue and the expense. And it implies changes to our fulfillment, right, and how we do it, CRM. So introducing new product or a new service or a new revenue stream can change all of those walled gardens. And to think that the processes only exist within each silo, I think is limiting your potential for your processes and for your business and your operational excellence. And then lastly, with low code, no code, just proceed with caution, right? Talk to BP3 if you haven't. These are things that we're expert in helping figure out, helping our clients think through. And we are by no means anti low code, no code. Like, I love a drag and drop UI builder and building databases, drag and drop and things like that. They're great ways to get started, and sometimes great ways to build solutions. But also there are limitations, and you've got to know what those are going in so that you don't paint yourself into the corner. And that, those are kind of my final thoughts. Lance, anything you want to add to that?
No, not at all. I think, again, Jeremy brought home on, what are some of these definitions that get like low code, no code system developer. I think, all these things are kind of still getting defined as we go, right? When it comes to process automation, I mean, all of these things have process mining, Lean Six, low code, no code, RPA, AI, all of it has a.
Well, I think that's a good point. It's all evolving, and all of that evolution. You just have different ways to implement your process, different options for how to improve it, and you just don't want to get stuck. So, well, guys, I hope you enjoyed the day and enjoyed joining us for this conversation. I look forward to seeing you in a situation more like the one we have in the picture on the right there. Just enjoying a little happy hour opportunity. Someday in our future, we'll be getting together in person again, and just really appreciate everyone joining us today for Process Day. And tomorrow we'll focus on application modernization, and we tackle those problems with a process lens, but I think you'll find there's some great content there for how to build solutions around the ideas of process.
Scott, I think
Chris, any part
in that picture does not want a repeat of that day, but good times. So
it was just a little hot.
It was hot in there, yeah.
Tomorrow morning.
For those who don't know, that picture was taken on a day where the air conditioning died in that building, and so we,
in August,
it got a little hot.
Austin,
yeah, it
Texas,
was August.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
But tomorrow is same.
That was
time.
what you call a process failure.
Yes, it was. Same time, same place. If you're not registered for the Application Modernization Day, make sure you do, because we'll be talking about really important topics like microservices. You can register on our website. The other thing is, if you haven't registered for your t-shirt, it is in the chat. There's a link to download or to get your free Driven t-shirt in the chat. So we will see everyone tomorrow. Same links will be there tomorrow too.
All right. Thank you all.